Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the future. I'm super excited about this month's theme because some of the chapter organizers got to pick, we're having theme months this year, and the future was my suggestion because I'm really interested in the future, and particularly the ways in which it is not. I like to think about it, and I think about the ways in which it is not fulfilling our expectations. Because I read a lot of sci-fi when I was 12, and I was gonna buy a Star Trek uniform to wear for this. Because I had it all picked out. It was like the next generation female commander's uniform, and they had it on Amazon. And then I thought about it, and I thought, what do I really think people are gonna be wearing 100 years from now? And it's this. Because this is pretty much exactly what I wore when I was 12. And it's still very contemporary. It's universal, it's unisex. The only difference is, instead of my Nikes being pink, they're blue, and I have a pod in there that talks to my iPhone. So that's future-y. But you look around, and things are the same. Like my bike, my 21st century bike, looks a whole lot like the 10-speed I had when I was 12. But it's got more technology that's sort of visible. So this is my futuristic outfit that I wore, because I really think 100 years from now, people are gonna live like this. And now I'm gonna interact with the futuristic remote here, and I'm gonna mess it up. This is Creative Mornings, so welcome if you're wandering down the street and don't know why you're here. I'm Erica Hall from Mule Design, in case you don't know who I am. The exciting thing about Mule Design, and possibly some of your futures, is we are hiring. We're looking for a visual designer and a project manager primarily, but send your inquiries to jobs@muledesign.com if your future and our future could be combined. There we go. I'd really like to thank Benjamin Wynn, as always. Where is he for doing all the logistics and stuff? He wanted cuter puppies in the future, so his expectations are particularly high. Jason Permenzer and Tom Carmody taking photos, Whisk SF with the coordinating of the pastries and food and things, and Jenny Chu with the video so people in the future can watch this. There we go. And of course, Parasoma are awesome hosts every month, and we love them. Tweet, use this hashtag. I'm sure there'll be things you want to share with the world. And now, the speaker, Annalee Newitz, known her for a while and a huge fan of her work. You might have read her column, Texploitation, that was syndicated and ran for a really long time. She's the editor-in-chief of the kind of sci-fi and science blog io9.com, which is part of the Gawker family and is really awesome. And in a couple weeks, she has a book coming out that I'm super excited for, but the title is long. And I arrived on a plane very late last night, so I'm going to have to read it. Scatter, Adapt, and Remember: How Humans Will Survive a Mass Extinction. I think all of you should be prepared. Be prepared, because things are pretty weird out there, and there might be an extinction-level event. So with that in mind, Annalee Newitz, everybody.
Thanks very much. Am I on? Thanks very much, and thanks for having me. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically the far future. I want to sort of take you out of what we normally think of as the future and what we normally think of as time. So when we think about time and we think about the future, I think because most of us work in tech and because we're surrounded by an extremely tech-saturated landscape, we think of the future as being like the next 15 minutes, the next meeting, the next week, maybe. A week is kind of long, right? Like whatever happens at the end of the week seems like it's sort of like happening in glacial time. But with this book that I've just finished, I really had to immerse myself in something that went way beyond that kind of fast time of the everyday. I was looking at mass extinction, and of course there's been mass extinction several times on this planet. And I had to go back millions of years in geological time to think about them. And so I'm back here in the present to tell you a little bit about what I learned about time and how to think about time based on that. So I'm going to take you through 3 kinds of time. These are all times that take place out of that everyday weekly time, and talk to you a little bit about how you can use that understanding to prioritize what you want to do with your life and the future of the species. So the first kind of time is lifetime. That's basically the amount of time that it takes for an average human to live. So, anywhere from, say, 60 to 100 years at this point for most people on the planet. That's a lifetime. And if you want to think about what can happen in one human lifetime, think about the fact that basically in that time we've moved from extremely large computers that took up entire rooms to computers that can fit in your pocket. And in fact, there's one of those computers that's controlling this presentation right now. So that took place in a lifetime. The whole development of the internet took place in a lifetime. And I think that that can be kind of bewildering for us because it means that we think of technological change and social change as happening pretty fucking fast, right? Like, a lot of people grew up without having, people in this room probably grew up without having an internet connection, which is, I'm sorry about that. But now, can't live without them, right? It's just absolutely unimaginable. And so I think we tend to get tricked into thinking that almost all scientific and technological change will take place that fast. We're just expecting it. Like, we're going to have food pills. We're going to have genetic engineering that's going to alter the shape of our bodies probably in 10 years. But not all change takes place at that speed. In fact, the change that we've seen with the internet is really quite unusual. So let me tell you about another kind of time. That is species time. It's also what you might call evolutionary time. It's basically the amount of time that a given species is alive on the planet. And I have some good news for you about our species. We're mammals. That's why we're cute and furry, just like these guys, just like dolphins who aren't furry, but they're cute, and mice who are furry and cute. The average species lifespan of a mammal is 1 million years. So that means that we evolve, we're that species for 1 million years. At the end of that 1 million years, there's a couple things that can happen to a species. It can either go extinct, or more commonly, it does something called speciating. Speciating means it might split into multiple other species, so it evolves. So species are always evolving. I have news for you. We're just right at the very beginning of the human species. We evolved, Homo sapiens, that's all of us. We evolved about 200,000 years ago. So we're young, we're early in our species time. Who knows what the hell is gonna happen? Hopefully we're gonna get cuter. The lolcat evolution. So we're early in our species time. And finally, the really long time, that's geological time. So the Earth, our planet, which is still a pretty awesome planet, it's been around for about 4.5 billion years, okay? So we've gone beyond that million-year species time. We're looking at that 4.5 billion year time span. This is my favorite geological time map here. It just kind of gives you a list of all the different eras. We're way up there at the top in the Holocene. There were all of these other geological eras before, featuring things like dinosaurs and other creatures who are even more awesome than dinosaurs who came before that, like Dimetrodon, who has the big sail on his back, and 8 sharks. Okay, that's how badass Dimetrodon was, all right? Pre-dinosaur shark eating badass. So what happens in geological time, which we actually are seeing the effects of right now a lot, is the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is a natural chemical process that the Earth goes through. It takes millions of years, and all it is just the circulation of carbon into the atmosphere and back down into the ocean and into the Earth. And right now, we're in a phase where, as you know from reading about climate change and concerns about environmental change, we're at a phase where a lot more carbon is entering into our atmosphere. Very simple chemical process. The more carbon in the atmosphere, the warmer it gets. There have been many times on the planet, including during dinosaur times, when it was so warm that we had no polar ice caps. That was because it was a time during the carbon cycle when there was more carbon in the environment. It was nice and warm, nice and tropical. Antarctica was basically like a vacation home for dinosaurs. It really was. It was actually a beautiful, lush, tropical continent. And then there was tragic climate change for those guys down there. It iced over, and it was, a disaster. There was a mass extinction, in fact. So basically, we're living in all of these different timelines at once. We're living in our lifetimes, obviously. We're living in species time. We're part of a species that's growing and evolving, that grew and evolved out of Homo erectus and other friendly guys who hung out mostly in Africa. And we're also living in geological time, and it's affecting us, right? We're seeing the effects of what happens in geological time when there's a shift in the climate. Whether or not humans intervened in that, there would always be this carbon cycle happening all the time. And if you want to know more about the carbon cycle, I have lots of thoughts on that. You can ask those later. It's actually really quite interesting. So like I said at the beginning, one of the things that gets difficult for us as people living in that fast time is how do we prioritize what we want to do with our lives when we're bombarded with information about things like climate change, which is happening in geological time, when we're thinking about the future of humanity, because we want our kids to survive or our friends' kids to survive. We want to see the species go on. How does that fit with what you plan to do over the next 10 years, over the next 5 minutes? How do you figure that out? And it becomes very difficult, especially when, like I said, oftentimes there's this temptation to believe that things are going to happen much more quickly than they do. So let me tell you a quick story about thinking about timelines, and then we'll conclude. Basically, so right now we're at an early phase in commercial space travel, right? I don't know how many of you guys are excited about like living on the moon or living on Mars. I think we all kind of secretly wish we could take a trip there as long as they had sort of environmental protection for us and we didn't have to eat red dirt on Mars. If like we could have the total recall Mars, but not. This is actually Saturn. I would love to live on Saturn too, actually. That'd be awesome. Even better. So you're hearing about things like SpaceX, which is a commercially funded company that's interested in launching payloads into space and maybe people into space. And it seems like every 5 minutes we're hearing, yeah, humans are going to be living on the moon in our lifetime. You're going to look up at the moon and see a city. But the fact is that this is not really the kind of thing that can happen in one lifetime. And what I want to do is encourage you to think about something that happened 50,000 years ago, which is species time. So 50,000 years ago, humans living in Asia built reed boats, just like this one that you see up here, and they took those boats to Australia. Later, around, say, 15,000 years ago, they took those boats to the Americas and settled. So basically, humans invented boats 50,000 years ago, used them to colonize new continents, but we didn't have a system of international boat trade that allowed us to create a global civilization until about 500 years ago. So it took us thousands and thousands of years from those very first boats that let us go into the ocean and get to a faraway continent until we had something like the boat equivalent, say, of interplanetary travel. So when we think about the future of space travel and the future of humanity going into space, it's useful to think about those kinds of numbers. I hope it's not going to take us 50,000 years to be like living on Europa, although I guess we're not allowed to live on Europa according to 2001. But it is useful to think about the fact that these kinds of projects, these massive projects, which do fit into our everyday economy now, don't necessarily come to fruition in our lifetime. And so when you're thinking about what you want to do for your next project, what you want to do for your life, be thinking about the fact that some projects, whether it's going to space, whether it's intervening in climate change, whether it's just writing a book that you hope will survive for years after you die, those are parts of projects that will go on after you die, because you get the lifetime, that's your little time, but there's also species time, there's also geological time, and those will go on long after you finish. And so oftentimes these big projects like going to space have to be broken down into smaller projects that help you get there. And for example, Mae Jemison, who is a former astronaut and doctor, has just started a project with a lot of funding from the US government, or actually I should say a tiny amount of funding from the US government, called the 100-Year Starship. And her project is to build a ship that can travel between solar systems. It's a legitimate project. She has real scientists working on it, has that tiny amount of government funding, and is looking for public funding as well, and private funding. But obviously, it's a 100-year project, right? She's thinking in species time, a little piece of species time. And the way that she's planning that project, and her colleagues are planning it, is to break it down into lifetime-sized chunks, developing things like renewable fuels that might fuel such a ship, developing materials for the ship, things that you could develop in a lifetime, market in a lifetime, but could contribute to this longer project of going to another solar system, which is inherently awesome, but also a great idea for the future of the species, because we don't want to stay on this planet forever. We're going to need other options. So this is my book. I talk a lot about future projects that we might do and how they might fit into your lifetime. So if you're interested in hearing more about not just space travel, but other things we could do in the more near future, consider picking up my book. I have those stickers up at the front too that say no mass extinction, because that's another thing I have hope for in the future. So thanks very much.
All right, so anyway, questions about the future?
Yeah, hi. Somebody like Ray Kurzweil would talk about the exponential speeding up of progress and development. And he might say that, if we created a 100-year Starship or something like that, 5 years after we launched it, we have a 50-year Starship. And they'd catch up and meet in the middle of space. Do you think that, some of these species type events could be shortened down, and that, at some point we'll live forever, or we'll, no longer have to think about some of these things?
I'm extremely skeptical. I think Ray Kurzweil is falling prey to exactly what I talked about earlier, which is thinking that because computer technology developed so quickly in his lifetime, that that's how all technology develops. Something like a generation ship going to another star requires so many different kinds of technology that aren't just computer technology, that aren't just CPU technology. They're social technologies. The ability to mobilize a culture around an idea like that takes a long time. I don't think it will take 50,000 years. I really hope it won't. But I think imagining that you could send off a 100-year Starship that would get caught up by a 50-year Starship is, while fantastic if it happened, not very likely. And I think that's why it's important to be thinking in these long-term timeframes, because otherwise you start expecting a return on your time investment in a way that's very unrealistic. And so people drop projects because they're like, well, fuck it, man, I'm not on the moon yet. It's like, yeah, you know why? Because you're not going to be on the moon, because your species will be on the moon in 200 years, but not you. Sorry. Sorry, Ray.
We're already seeing intergenerational conflict between, say, boomers who have to finance their medical care, and the fact is they don't actually, it may have the assets, but it really seems that the arrangement is such that, the millennials are supposed to be unemployed in order to keep the assets in the hands of the people who need Botox and other treatments. So to me, it strikes me that the survival of a mass extinction has even more stark intergenerational conflict between the people who will benefit and the people who will have to finance it.
So you're asking how will the older generation finance the survival of the younger generations?
It's actually the reverse in this case. And I think Japan has an economy where lots of mass unemployment is actually due to a certain arrangement that keeps the older people wealthy.
Yeah, I think, so again, I think this is an issue of, this is sort of a lifetime question or maybe a short species time question, like how does one generation care for the next?
Right.
And I think it is a huge problem. Something like mass extinction, which I didn't really talk about all that much, that takes place in geological time. Like mass extinctions, the way that they're actually defined is over 75% of all species on the planet dying in less than 1 million years. So it's a very long time. Sometimes they've happened more quickly than that. Like,
are we in mass extinction now?
There's a lot of evidence that we may be in the early phases of a mass extinction. It's too soon to know, but there's actually a group of scientists led by a guy named Anthony Barnosky over at Berkeley who found by analyzing rates of species extinction that there is an alarming uptick in the number of species going extinct. Right now. We don't know if that means anything, but it does mean that, there's always species going extinct naturally, right? Otherwise, every species that had ever existed, including Dimetrodon, would still be here now, eating sharks. Sorry, I just love Dimetrodon so much. So Dimetrodon would still be here if there weren't just periodic, everybody going extinct all the time. So, but right now there is actually, like if you look at sort of background extinction rates, there is a kind of uptick. More animals and plants are going extinct than would be considered typical. So that's a warning sign that's happening in geological time. But I think your question about how do the generations pay for each other, I mean, that is really important, and I think we're going to have to get rid of that intergenerational conflict over time in order to sustain the species and not have those kinds of conflicts get played up by the economy. Yeah?
Is there any evidence of this sort of uptick of extinction really picking up fast in the last 200 years or so? And we look at plant animals gone extinct very, very recently?
Yes, the uptick in extinctions is over about the past 200 years. Part of the problem is that we don't have really good record keeping before that. So you always have to remember that this stuff, oftentimes we just don't have data going back much further than 200 or 300 years. But yeah, I mean, even over the last, say, few decades, there have been upticks in bird extinctions as well as frog, amphibian extinctions. Lots of insanely cute frogs are going extinct right now, which is always sad because I like frogs. But the question is it part of a trend, right? So we just don't know. Like there are a lot of species that are endangered right now that if all of those went extinct, we would be seeing a really catastrophic uptick in extinctions. Here's a really creepy statistic. Is everybody ready for a creepy statistic? Sorry, if you want to think about mass death. So there's a zoologist over at Cal Academy, Peter Rupnerine, who does computer simulations of extinction scenarios. It's actually fascinating. Like he's modeled a bunch of mass extinctions on his computer, previous mass extinctions, in order to tune the simulation to make sure that the simulation functions like a real mass extinction would, and then looked at how those work. And basically what happens is you see lots of extinctions happening, and it's fine, planet's going along fine. And if you reach a threshold of about 40% of species going extinct, suddenly that's the moment when you're fucked. Because basically, once you lose 40%, all species depend on each other, like for food, like we eat plants and we eat herbivores, and then predators eat the herbivores and things like that. So we're all interconnected. Once you lose 40% of species, your web of food, your food web, just unravels. And so suddenly you see what Rupnerine calls knock-on extinctions. Animals going extinct because the animals they eat went extinct. And suddenly it just shoots up. So you go from like 40% extinction to just like fuck you levels of extinction. You basically get into a mass extinction. So basically it's a tipping point. So if you reach that 40% tipping point, then you really are looking down the barrel of something quite massive. But again, these things take place over hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah?
So how long does it take
So the question is, how long does it take for species to normalize, to like bounce back from a mass extinction? So that's actually a really interesting question. And it happens differently every time. So we've had 5 big mass extinctions already on the planet. And those are just the mass extinctions. We've also had smaller ones where like, oh, only 30% of all life died. Sometimes it recovers pretty quickly. But actually, there was one mass extinction, everybody's favorite mass extinction, 250 million years ago at the end of the Permian period, which is not up on the screen anymore. I'm just going to tell you about it because it's awesome. Basically, there was a megavolcano. You guys know about megavolcanoes? Not just from movies anymore. This volcano in Siberia went off for about 1,000 years. So only 1,000 years of volcano. Fucked the atmosphere. And basically 90 to 95% of all species died out. Bugs, plants, land animals, sea animals. So it was devastation. Basically the main life form on the planet after that was a form of slime mold. And there's actually geologists refer to it jokingly as slime world. So slime world basically lasted for about 30 million years. And the reason why was because the food webs that kept springing up, like the species that kept evolving to fill those old niches, were really unbalanced. There were way more predators than there were herbivores. And so you got like a lot of predators constantly basically killing each other off and not having enough food to eat. So it really took quite a long time to recover, but not all mass extinctions are that bad. So sometimes it's more quickly and you're looking at maybe 1 million years or something, but that was a bad one. And actually, after the end of that horrible time in the early Triassic was when dinosaurs evolved. So dinosaurs evolved out of this really horrible time of like mega predators. I really hope Sci-Fi Channel does like an early Triassic like predator show, because that was when they had like giant alligators, basically. Giant alligators fighting it out. Dimetrodon was already dead, so, but anyway, that was what happened at the end of the Permian. Oops, I was gonna show you this. So you can see the Permian in there. Yeah?
Why do we want humans to survive?
I do, yeah. Why do we want humans to survive? Basically, I mean, I'm a human. We're all humans. I actually think we're pretty cool. We've done some pretty awesome things so far. We've invented some pretty good tools. We're actually really good at forming communities, although we're also really good at destroying communities. So it's kind of an open question of whether we will survive as a species, but whether we should survive, absolutely, because if we do survive, that means that we've kind of processed our issues, right? We've worked it out. And I hope very much that we do. And I think there is really good evidence that we can do it. Certainly there's evidence that we might not do it, but I think that we have a fighting chance and that we should fight for it. Yeah?
What role do you see artificial intelligence playing in the big picture that you're talking about? Because right now I understand what you're saying, we're in the small picture, but artificial intelligence seems like something that happens that could change the big picture dramatically.
Yeah, so how would artificial intelligence change like that species time picture or the geological time picture? I mean, I think that's one of the big question marks, right? Like, there's one scenario where artificial intelligence evolves and totally like rescues us, right? And like, sucks all the carbon out of the atmosphere and like, treats us well. Like if you've read Ian and Banks's culture novels, they're kind of like the minds that, protect us all the time. And I don't know if that's going to happen. Like the other scenario is that AI evolves and it's like a Terminator situation where like, we're all destroyed. I think it's also possible that AI might evolve like through Google search and it just wouldn't even give a shit about us. It would be like, oh, okay, there's some creatures over here, we're the creatures over here, we're going to Andromeda now, which happens at the end of Neuromancer, where there's this AI that evolves and is like, I don't care about humans, I just want to make art. So I think we just can't really know. I mean, the types of AI that many people are trying to build right now, like at Google, are basically slaves. So I would say that's probably not a good idea. It's never a good idea to try to like build sentient slaves. It didn't work the first time when we had sentient slaves, so it seems like a bad idea. But what do I know? I don't know. It could turn out great, perfect slaves that never complain. I think it's a big question mark. I do think that it's much more likely that it won't be nearly as awesome as we hope it will be, but I could be wrong.
Okay, one more question.
How realistic do you think that humans are going to cause their own mass extinction in either a lifetime or a species time for the next ones? Because the last ones were like a natural type disaster.
Yes, so the previous mass extinctions all took place without an intelligent or seemingly intelligent species helping it along. How likely is it that we would cause a mass extinction in one lifetime? Pretty much zero. Because remember, a mass extinction has to be 75% or more of all species on the planet dying out. Could we do that in a lifetime? I really don't think so. Like, I guess if we unleashed every single nuke, but even then, I don't know. Whether we could do it in a species lifetime, 1,000,000 years, yeah, that could happen. And it is true that if we keep engaging in industrial production with no change whatsoever, let's say one industrial revolution is equal to one megavolcano in the Permian. That was pretty devastating. I mean, the megavolcano at the end of the Permian, the reason why it wrecked the planet was because it was pumping carbon and other noxious gases into the environment. It was like a little like a very large industrial revolution. There was like enough lava that came out that it would have covered basically northern Europe. It was a big, big volcano. And actually there's a similar volcano under Yellowstone right now. You guys know about that, right? It's kind of terrifying. So visit Yellowstone now before the caldera goes. So I think, yeah, one of the projects we obviously need to do as a species is try to prevent climate change from killing us and all of our other pals on the planet. So it'll take longer than a lifetime, but it can be done. It's actually, you just have to mess around with the carbon cycle. I think we can do it. Not tomorrow. Thanks very much.
I bet all your problems seem really small now. Oh my God, the line at Blue Bottle is so long. It's like species time long. Annalee Newitz, everybody. That was awesome. Scatter, adapt, and remember. It's coming out just in time to make a fantastic graduation gift for the young people in your life who might have to do those things. Next month, we're talking about comics. We like to mix it up. Kevin Chang will be here to talk about communicating through comics. Thanks so much for coming out. It was great seeing you. And remember to recycle your cups on the way out. We'll see you next time. Thanks a lot to Parasoma and everybody else helping out. Bye-bye.